Good to go. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
So today we're going to talk about turkey, the Christmas turkey. So Charles gave me we decided to suspend the Life of Messiah series for another week. So he did a Christmas one last week, and I'm doing this one this year on what I think is one of the more significant end-time players that I do not think is talked about enough. I will share again, I do talk about it quite a bit, but many years ago, Bill Koenig and Bill had spoken at a conference in Phoenix, went over to the pastor's house afterward, and it was the speakers, David Hocking, Roger Oakland, Bill Koenig, and Chuck Missler. Bill and I ended up at a table alone with Chuck Missler, and I asked Chuck, Chuck, who had become a good friend, a very special guy for me. And I said, are you excited about the end time? So this is about 2008 or 9. And he goes, well, yeah, but I'm watching Turkey. And when I see Turkey start to go towards in a little bit different direction, then I'm going to get really excited. So I wonder what he would be like today. So I talk about Turkey a lot because I think it's very significant. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's important, why I think it is a significant end-time player, as I've said in my title slide. And then we'll talk about some of the development of the career of Erdogan. Now, I know that there's a time limit. So this could go on for quite a long time, but as you can appreciate, I was joking with someone in Israel about someone that I like to interview, and I said, he's a great interview. I said, just say, hi, how you doing? And then 50 minutes later, you say, thank you for joining us today. And the guy said, yeah, it sounds like somebody else I know. But this is a very significant time in which we live. So one of the, I've been playing around with different, like how to show an end-time chessboard over the Middle East. That's one of my attempts. But there was a book written a number of years ago by Zbigniew Brzezinski called The Grand Chessboard. And Brzezinski was a technocrat. He was a national security advisor in the Carter administration. And he had a very high opinion of himself. And I will say, I think that whoever drew that picture on the right, it's one of the best efforts in actually capturing the inner essence of the man. And I keep joking that someday Joe Scarborough is going to wake up, roll over, and look at Brzezinski's daughter, Mika, and that's what he's going to see with blonde hair, assuming she's getting her hair colored. But Brzezinski believed that there was this grand chessboard. There were some other people that expanded on. There was a guy who wrote a big article back in the early 1900s named Halford Mackinder. Mackinder had this world island. He thought that the Central European plain, Poland, Germany, Russia, was sort of the pivot point of history. Other people expanded that down to include Turkey, and I think Turkey, you'll see, is very strategically located. So because of Brzezinski and other people, and I see people using the chess piece thing, all chessboard and chess pieces thing all the time now. So I doubt that they're following me, but it's just something that I look at. And I think, what's going on with Iran is incredibly significant. I think I did this, I talked about this, that we had wars. We're in a period of time where there's a lot of things going on in Bible prophecy. Wars, rumors of wars, and wars of rumors. That seems to characterize the time in which we live. And then you see these strange alliances developing. Like this poster billboard that was put up in Israel, abrahamshield.org. I know some of the people behind that. They actually believe that it's part in there. They could be a two-state solution. But then the other thing that they advocate is for Gaza particularly is a technocracy a technocratic governance of that area, which that's like the dream of guys like Brzezinski. And so now you're in Israel, and then it's kind of interesting, and I'm not saying this is that which was prophesied. I think I have been talking more in terms of meeting threshold limits now. So if you have to hit this line to be able to say, this is that which was prophesied, to say this prophecy has been fulfilled, at some point we'll be hitting that line on a lot more than we already are, which I mean complete fulfillment of some of the prophecies. And so I'm not saying this is that, but this is kind of interesting picture because you have Trump and Bibi Netanyahu in the middle, but then what else do you have there? You have 10 kings. And that's kind of interesting. And I think if you look at Psalm 83, a lot of those countries fall into, regions fall into Psalm 83. So it could be that, we're getting very, very close. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about Turkey, Syria, the relationship between the two. Then I'll touch a little bit on Qatar, Qatar, I think is probably the better way to say it. And we'll also talk a little bit about Turkey's interest in the Temple Mount. And they do have a massive interest in the Temple Mount. And you'll see that in just a moment. So let's just put some context in this. In Ezekiel chapter 38, some of these countries or regions are identified. It says, "Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, This is what the Lord God says, Behold, I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So I will turn you around and put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you out, and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them magnificently dressed, a great contingent with shield and buckler, all of them wielding swords. Persia, Cush, and put with them, all of them with buckler and helmet, Gomer with all its troops, Beth Togarmah from the remote parts of the north with all of its troops, many peoples with you." So then the question becomes what's he talking about? You can look at all the atlases in the world today, and they're all over. We have Google Earth, earth.google.com, we have Google Maps, we have all these tremendous mapping programs, and you can go and look on them and say, hey, where's Magog? Where's Meshech? Where's Tubal? And you're not going to find anything. So about 10 years ago, Joel Richardson, who I know, he did a study of all of the biblical maps that he could find and get his hands on. And what he found was, so the current narrative that I think predominates in Bible prophecy circles, because I speak with these guys and they've written books, and sometimes writing a book is a good thing. You learn a lot about a topic, but then you also kind of get married to that idea. And I think we live in a time where being too married to your ideas is not necessarily going to be a way for you to be able to pivot to the actual facts on the ground. So I appreciate guys like Joel. So the current narrative is that Gog, Magog, is talking about this great Russian army that's going to come down into the Middle East. So that's why, and they say, well, because it's north, it's the far regions of the north. But then you get into the question of what was Ezekiel talking about when Ezekiel wrote it? Was he talking about, and then you'll say some people take the people that are identified, which come out, some of them come out of the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. They look at that and they say, oh, it's the bloodline. Well, if you start tracing the bloodlines of these people who lived in this region, you essentially now cover 2/3 of the world, because people, you may have noticed, people move around. And people moved around even in the old days when it was harder to move around than it is now. Now you can just get on a plane and move someplace. But so I don't know that the bloodline thing works. I don't have the time to go into it. There's also a Jewish publication set of books called the Book of Jubilees. That's probably one of the, in terms of Ezekiel writing, around the time of the Babylonian captivity, 586 BC, the Book of Jubilees was probably done around 200-300 BC. So that's kind of close in time to Ezekiel's time. And so when you look at the Book of Jubilees, they're sort of describing some of these areas. So maybe that's authoritative. And I don't even begin to have time to scratch the surface on that. If you want to get that, by the way, you can find them. They're online. They're free. You can access them. Interesting, you'll find things that in the Book of Jubilees that are directly tied to rivers in Ukraine and that sort of thing. So even with the current names of those rivers. But that's not the point. But the point is, the narrative has become Russia's this mighty army that comes down out of the far reaches of the north. But we don't know if that's what Ezekiel was thinking about. And Ezekiel looked at people groups. And I think if you look objectively at all of the biblical analysis and the biblical maps, you're going to find that a lot of these groups, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Togarmah, are located in Turkey. A lot of the maps also put Magog in Turkey. Now, why does everybody say Russia? Well, Bible prophecy unfolds and is fulfilled in a real world with real people, real countries, real geopolitics. Ezekiel was writing what he knew about at his time. And so when, for example, Hal Lindsey, we all know Hal Lindsey, I think 69 or 70, he published Late Great Planet Earth. And in 1969 or 70, we were in the middle of a thing called the Cold War. And Russia was involved in our daily lives. We were scared of Russia. We were concerned about Russia and where we're going to be geopolitically. I had friends who served in Vietnam because of the communists and the Chinese and the Russians and all of that. But the thing that is interesting is that in our lifetimes, now John Dickey's much closer to some of this stuff than I am, but it's recent ancient history. But things, the map of the world changes. Things have changed. But I think that Ezekiel, the best way to interpret it is, Ezekiel in Ezekiel 38 was looking at where those people groups were at that time. And so that when the end time prophecies are fulfilled, it's not going to be where those people move to, it's going to be people coming from that particular region. I think that's the best interpretation. And Turkey is very significant, but look at how things, now this is beyond John Dickey's time. This is the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916, just barely, right? And by the way, my YouTube feed is full of what people look like when they were younger and now what they look like and now they're dead. And now I'm seeing all these people, famous actress died just like yesterday. She was 91. And I started looking, she was born in 1934. That's getting closer to when I was born, and they're 90, it just doesn't, things aren't matching up here. So and then you'll hear, I'll hear about somebody, I'll look them up, and they're like 103, and they're still alive, and, or 95 or 98, and they're still hanging in there. But the Sykes-Picot Agreement, in the midst of World War I, these British, French guys got together, and they thought, we're so smart, we're going to figure out how to divide up the Middle East. That was lunacy, and we are still paying the price for what they tried to do back in 1916, because they didn't take into account tribal loyalties and that sort of thing. And what you're going to find is, at least as I'm learning through guys like Mordecai Kedar from Israel, that tribal identity is very, very important in the Middle East. It's sort of tribe, religion, country in order of priority. Here, we're sort of like America first and that type of thing. But there, it's tribe. And I remember talking to somebody who was living in Turkey, and he said he went to a meeting. He had met this guy, bought him a cup of coffee, and then he got invited over to somebody's house, and he goes there. And he's like given the seat of honor at this big dinner, like a couple hundred people. And then he figured out the guy that I bought coffee for was the head of this tribe or clan. And so I was now his friend, and now I was elevated in status. But this causes massive problems in Israel. There's clans and tribes in Gaza, which lead to a lot of conflict. So they decided to create this area, and you see the Area A, that was going to be the French mandate. And that sort of bears relationship, at least in terms of shape, to the country of Syria, although it was broken, it's been shrunk down a little bit. And then Area B was the British area. And there's also an Area C that was Russian. I think it's on the prior map, the purple area. And the point of all of this is they made a mess of everything. So a lot of these countries we see and we talk about in geopolitics, they're relatively recent creations. In the lifetime of some of us, things have changed. We hear about, I'll use the term gutter all the time now. Gutter's a relatively recent creation. Back in the 60s or early 70s is when it came into being. And the other thing too is a lot of these are like fake countries. So what happened, just to give you a history lesson, so the Brits, we're so smart, we can't even hold on to our empire, but we're going to tell everybody else how to make up their country. It was a little bit on the arrogant side. So they went into the Middle East and they said, okay, look, we're going to, there was, Israel, they had this mandate for Palestine. And originally it was supposed to be Jewish, west of the Jordan River, Palestinian, Arab state, east of the Jordan. And so the Jewish state originally, under this mandate, in which everybody adopted back in the 1920s, the world agreed on it, was literally a Jewish state from the river to the sea. And now everybody's been chipping away at it ever since. Israel has given up land. They gave up the Sinai. They gave up control of areas of what's called the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. They gave up Gaza. And everybody says, look at them, they're in this massive colonial expansion. This is the amazing thing about the world today. Reality is inverted about every 5 minutes on my Twitter feed, X feed. It's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. And now I'm learning that a lot of these are bot accounts. And so these people, for example, I talk a lot about Israel because I think it's important in Bible prophecy. It's central to that, along with the return of Jesus Christ. But you hear somebody like Tucker Carlson, who says, you Christian Zionists, you talk about Israel all the time. Maybe, but nobody talks about it more than you, Tucker. He's like obsessed with it, and that's all he ever talks about. So here I am, still in my intro, and the clock seems to be moving along. I'm doing second hour, so I guess I can go over. So Israel has had this tremendous growth. This is a picture of Allenby, Jerusalem, December 11th, 1917. Allenby came in and the Ottoman Empire surrendered to Allenby. They had run Jerusalem and that area of the Middle East for 400 years. Very significant thing as he marched in. And people don't like it. For example, this is an editorial cartoon I found of Erdogan. And I think this really sort of, like the Brzezinski caricature, captured the essence of the man. This captures the essence of the man as well, that he's always trying to redraw the map in the Middle East. And this has tremendous historical, geopolitical, biblical, and prophetic significance. I also found this. I'll talk a little bit about this. I followed Erdogan's career for ever since I had that conversation with Chuck Missler many years ago. And I think this sort of captures the mentality of the guy. So when he was first elected to office, and you remember Netanyahu recently when they were opening the Pilgrimage Road or having a ceremony for it, wasn't really quite, I think it was sort of a political thing that they did because it wasn't quite open yet. When we got there, we were able to get access to all of it though, but I think it's open now. But he said, I wanted to get a artifact that had ended up in a museum in Turkey, in Istanbul. So I called the president of Turkey at the time. He said, I can't give that back to you. I've got this Islamic guy who's the mayor of Istanbul. And if I do this will be a problem. This was the guy. So Erdogan came in, he got elected president. So you see the stair steps of Erdogan's career, prime minister, excuse me. Then when he couldn't be prime minister anymore because of term limits, he changed the constitution to make it so he could become president. And he's been elected president. Now there's another election coming up. Don't know if he'll run for it. I've mentioned this many times. He is 2 days younger than I am. And he's looking older. I have to say, I watch him a lot. I watch his speeches. And I think he's not doing that well because when you're oppressing your people all the time, and you think you should run the world because he doesn't want to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. He wants a global caliphate, and he wants to be the sultan of that. So that's, I think, his ultimate goal. And by the way, he doesn't care if it's him or his successor, or now it seems like he's grooming his son. We'll talk a little bit about this. But Erdogan has changed the way Turkey was. When Ataturk founded the modern Turkish state back in the 1920s, it was very secular, not Islamic or anything like that. Erdogan came into office about not quite 25 years ago, and he changed everything. They had a secular military. He's completely revamped the military, the judiciary. And my understanding is there's like tens of thousands of people in prison in Turkey because they criticize you-know-who. And he's changed it into an Islamic Muslim Brotherhood country. This is very significant. This is the country where the 7 churches of Revelation were located. You go there now, there's not anything there that's Christian. It's been changed, and a lot of this has changed since the Muslims took over and defeated the eastern half of the Roman Empire back in the 1400s. We'll talk a little bit about that. But one thing you need to do is look at the imagery that Erdogan uses. So first, I think Meshech, Tubal, Togarmah, and probably even Magog are centered around Turkey. And it's a land bridge between the continents. It's a big gas pipeline, transit hub, and all that things. But Erdogan wants to restore the glory of the Turkish caliphate that ran. And so when Abbas came to see Erdogan about 10 years ago, This was the imagery that Erdogan decided to use in the meeting with Abbas. And what do you see? You see all of these dressed up Turkish warriors, historical warriors. This is the way the guy thinks. And he wants to do the invasion. Now, in Istanbul, there's this giant church called Hagia Sophia. It's the largest church ever built in the history of Christianity. It was built in 5 years back in the 400s. It's had some fires. The original dome was wood. But it's this magnificent building. Some Bible prophecy teachers, and I think it's a mistake, have even said this is the temple. This is the real temple because it's the height of Christianity construction. But you can see it's a beautiful building. It still stands there. It's been there since the 400s. We're talking 1,600 years since it opened. It's huge, and a lot of people, and it was like the largest building anywhere for anything in the expansive dome for a long time. And you see the imagery. You see clear Christian icons and imagery in there. But now what do you see? You see Arabic writing, Quran writings, because about 5 years ago, Erdogan said, I'm turning Hagia Sophia into a mosque. So the Ottomans took it over, Turkish Empire took it over in the 1400s. They turned it into a mosque. Then under Ataturk, it became a museum. And Erdogan now has turned that back into a mosque. And when they turned it back into a mosque, he gave this. It's a manifestation of it's a product of the same logic to demand the Vatican be converted into a museum and insist that the Hagia Sophia remain as a museum. This is his speech when they did the dedication of turning it from a museum into a mosque 5 years ago. The oldest temple of worship of humanity and the ancient temple of Masjid al-Aqsa. What's Masjid al-Aqsa? So this is something you need to know. You need to understand the Turkish and Muslim mindset, but mainly led by the Ottoman Turks. So this is a publication. You can see the original at Christ Church in their little museum that they have there near the Jaffa Gate. And I've seen the original, but it's called Al-Haram al-Sharif. It was published by the leading Muslim holy man in Jerusalem back in the 1920s. They did it like 23, 24, 25. And in there, it says, the site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates. This is a Muslim publication. Its sanctity dates from the site of Solomon's temple. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. What do they say now? There's no temple here. Temple's not here. And they do everything in the world to hide that. Great video. I posted it on my Facebook page this week. Yishai Fleischer, who I know, did a tour went through the Temple Mount tunnels at the Western Wall, Temple Mount tunnels with Ohad Tal, who's a National Religious Zionist Party member and a member of Knesset and a member of Netanyahu's cabinet. He came and spent a couple hours with us when we were on our tour in Israel back in October. And he's a Zionist. Okay, I mean, he's an Orthodox Jewish Zionist. Carries a gun around a fraud. That's kind of interesting. Everybody carries a gun in a fraud. There's a lot of reasons for that. But they went there, and it was Mossab Youssef, the son of Amos, was also on this tour. And they showed areas where the Arabs have poured concrete to prevent, like, several feet thick concrete walls to prevent anybody from doing further excavations. Why do they not want any further excavations done? because it would prove that there was a Jewish temple there. And so everything is designed to prevent that. And so what's happened, though, is in the on the Temple Mount, there is a mosque. It is called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's been called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was built back in the 700s. By the way, it collapsed in an earthquake back in the 1920s or 30s. They had some beams left over. They stuck them over here by the eastern gate, the one that's closed. And you can go see them today. They've been dated, appear to be at least one of those beams came from Solomon's temple, and 7 of them came from the Second Temple period of Herod. And they're just, you can go walk, well, you can't, I think you could walk up and touch them if you want. I'm sure the Muslim police would be on your case, but they're just laying there under a tarp on the Temple Mount today. And so that area, though, that mosque, that's what used to be called Al-Aqsa. The whole area was called Haram al-Sharif. But what people like Erdogan and others have done is they now call the whole thing Al-Aqsa. Why? Because they're trying to do Muslim supremacy over the area and deny the historical connection of Jewish people to that place. Another example would be, I've mentioned this many times, when you're driving out of Jerusalem up the Highway 60, which is known as the Highway of the Patriarchs. What patriarchs? Well, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. There's an unfinished building on one of the highest points of land there. It was being built by King Hussein of Jordan back in the 60s, was building his summer palace there. Well, why did he choose that? Well, it's a nice view. It'd be, real estate with a view is very valuable, but it's also over the historical site of Gibeah. What is Gibeah? That is the tribal home, that it was the tribal capital of the tribe of Benjamin. Who came from the tribe of Benjamin? Saul, the first king of Israel. And I believe some excavations have discovered remnants of Saul's palace in that area. And so why did Hussein choose that? Because he wanted to show, I am a Muslim, I'm coming in here and I'm building on top of where you say your first king came from, because I'm superior, I'm in charge. And all of the geopolitics of the Middle East revolve around that. So back in...
After more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering. That is why, consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This decision is not intended in any way to reflect a departure from our strong commitment to facilitate a lasting peace agreement. There will, of course, be disagreement and dissent regarding this announcement. But we are confident that ultimately, as we work through these disagreements, we will arrive at a peace and a place far greater in understanding and cooperation. This sacred city should call forth the best in humanity, lifting our sights to what it is possible, not pulling us back and down to the old fights that have become so totally predictable. It is
so. And we know that in June of so that was December of 2017 when Trump made that speech at the White House. and made the announcement, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. We're moving our embassy there. And then in May, at the time of the 70th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel, the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem opened. You can go there today and see it. What was the response? The leader of the response, the outrage in the Muslim world, was Erdogan of Turkey. So his newspapers, one of which is Yeni Safak, it's one of his mouthpiece newspapers. Probably things don't get published in there unless they're positive towards Erdogan. And you see that. The Intifada, Qudus, Al-Quds, Jerusalem's in danger. And this went on for days. Okay? And this is, so you can get the translation. So what Erdogan did was he brought all the Muslim countries in, the 57 Muslim states. I wonder if that's where Obama got that number. Remember he said we have 57 states? We have 57 states. Just probably a coincidence. But he brought in the Organization of Islamic Countries, and they had a big meeting in Istanbul to rail against Israel. This is terrible. This is going to cause World War III. And by the way, this is what they say all the time. Remember last June, they even had people on the so-called right in America saying that if the United States help Israel bomb Iran and disable the nuclear facilities, we're going to have World War III. And it never happens, right? Then, well, we'll see. So, but it's interesting in this newspaper and on the website, the Arabs and Muslims were really upset about the U.S. recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. And then it's kind of interesting. Israel on an expansionist path since the beginning. This is Daily Sabah from December of 2017 when they were having this big meeting. And this is Erdogan at the podium, and he's showing the different areas. And by the way, see how they interpret in their language, Palestine comes out, it's Philistin. Probably because that's where the Romans got it from, but it had nothing to do with Palestinians. But anyway, so everybody was upset, and he published this. This is so interesting. When I go to prophecy conferences, inevitably somebody's going to talk about Ezekiel 38. And usually they're going to talk about Russia coming down. And they've got we've all got our little maps, and that's fine. Make all the maps you want. I love maps. I think they're great visuals. But my point is, when we talk about Ezekiel 38, why don't we use the maps that one of the participants in Ezekiel 38, the president leader of one of those countries that we know that Turkey's involved in this, okay? We can argue about Russia or not. But why don't we use their map when we talk about Ezekiel 38? And I'm saying it's right there in Yeni Safek. There's a website you can go to today. And this is an interactive website that's still live on the internet, at least as when I checked it a month ago. And what do you see? You see the lines coming from all Muslim countries in the world to Israel. What does Ezekiel 38 talk about? Talks about all these countries coming against Israel. I believe Islam is a very important thing in the end times. And then they also had this comparison published, Muslim armies versus Israel. Comparison, they show the population, their gross domestic product, how much they spend on the military. But look at the imagery that they used. You have a sea of green, countries, tanks, ships, aircraft, whatever, pointed at Israel in red. It's like the best Ezekiel 38 map you could come up with. There's another version of it. So this is always. So this was the people that came. Erdogan gave a speech. I don't think it was 48 countries. Okay, but you can see that he used all the imagery, the map and that type of thing. It's kind of interesting. He actually put Israel in there, which is kind of unusual. So then in Jerusalem is the capital. Then in 2019, Trump said, hey, Golan Heights is part of Israel. They all wet their pants again about, I don't know. I don't know the technical term would be. But it's interesting. So Erdogan goes to make a speech, and he's making these comments about President Trump's unfortunate announcement regarding the Golan Heights, the region towards new crises, drags the region towards new crises. The Golan Heights, listen to what he says, has been under Israeli occupation since 1967. Israel's 1967 occupation has displaced not only Arabs living in the area, but the Turkmen population as well. Erdogan is a Turkmen. He is of the Turkmen tribe. And this is becoming a very big deal. I talked about it a year ago. There was another article about Today in Turkey or some kind of newspaper like that. By the way, do you understand how much garbage I read to do these things? Because I want to know what's going on. But in there, it was like the education ministry in Turkey is changing the Turkish textbooks as we speak. They're going to refer to Central Asia, the Stan republics, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, however you say it, and all those other Stan republics. They're Turkmen ethnic predominant. They're Muslim. They used to be part of the Soviet Union. They're now calling that region in the Turkish textbooks Turkestan. I'm not, sometimes you would think like, come on, you're really making that up. No, I've seen the maps. I've seen pictures of the textbooks. They changed the name of that. There was an article in Eurasia Times a couple weeks ago. A friend sent me from California, and she was very astute to pick it up. It said, this is causing Putin to have some heartburn. I guess that's my paraphrase of it, because what Erdogan is doing is he's making all of these agreements with these Central Asian Stan republics. Putin thought, well, I've got them under my control. They'll do what I want. They'll help me out. They won't attack me. Now they're starting to pivot towards Turkey. That's very interesting development geopolitically and prophetically, I think. So, and one of the examples that they use is Erdogan's making agreements with people all over the place. I have a map here of some of the areas and regions that Erdogan's been invited. So you see Central Asia, of course, the arrow at the top. You see into Europe, he's done that. And by the way, he's building these giant mosques all over the world, in the UK, in the United States. And I got videos of him like in the UK dedicating a mosque, and it's really creepy when he's like singing the Quran. In his younger days, he won awards for reciting the Quran. He used to stand on the ferries going across the Bosporus and recite the Quran, like stand up in a prominent place. This guy's a Muslim. He's Muslim Brotherhood. But he's also, I don't have time to go into it. He went into Libya. They're the one to the lower left. He made an agreement. He did this exclusive economic zone to block Israel's pipeline. So what's Israel doing? Well, Israel just this week entered into this agreement with Greece and Cyprus about doing a pipeline, and the response of the Turkish government was, go ahead. We have that blocking, we blocked you, like a chess move. Erdogan was very much behind the Muslim Brotherhood takeover of Egypt about 2013. And I think it went too fast because they tried to do in a year what it took Erdogan over a decade to do. So that you have to do this. He's moved into Syria. He's wanted to move into there. He's moving against the Kurds. He's also that middle, on the right, the line down from the top. He's now entered into an agreement with Azerbaijan, another Turkmen ethnic group, because he wants to make a corridor to the Caspian Sea. Why does he want to go to the Caspian Sea? Because it's full of oil and gas. And he wants to get control of it. And look, I don't need to run the wells. You just need to pay me to use my pipelines to get it to market. So he entered into an agreement. It's kind of an interesting way to describe the agreement with Azerbaijan. It was two countries, Turkey, Azerbaijan, one sovereignty, the Turkmen tribe at the top. You see how that's all working? And so a lot of this stuff kind of flies under our radar. So he's been all over the place. He's got people in Somalia. He's got people in Sudan. You know, he's all over the place. So these are all very significant developments. So back in last year, he did a speech in Mardin, Turkey, and he said, talking about Mardin has one neighborhood that is Bursa, another that is Adana. Our neighborhood, our Turkish neighborhood, is Sarajevo. That's in Yugoslavia, or what used to be Yugoslavia, while another is Aleppo, Hama, and Homs. Those are in Syria. So do you see what he said a year ago in December? Syria is part of us. This is very significant prophetically because he's wanted to move the borders down a lot. Jerusalem is our city, he says this. By the way, at this speech, which was, remember, the Syrian government fell under Turkish-backed rebels December 8th, a year ago. I mean, this is like really recent history, but it's also very recent, prophetically significant history that's happening right in front of us. So he did the speech at Mardin, and during the speech, the crowd started chanting. And this is kind of interesting, where Ezekiel 38 talks about the chief prince of Tubal, Meshach, that type of thing. The crowd was chanting, translation, "Chief, take us to Jerusalem. Chief, take us to Jerusalem." This is just 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks after the fall of Syria to Turkish-backed rebels, because they have other things in mind. So then January 1st, a year ago, I mention this all the time, big protests, pro-Palestinian protests at the Galata Bridge in Istanbul, led by Erdogan's son. Title of the rally was "A Sun is Rising," S-U-N, see, half Turkish, half Palestinian. But then across the top, it had the translation of the first Dun Hagia Sophia is yesterday Hagia Sophia. The symbolism was, we took over the largest church ever built in the history of Christianity and made it a mosque. So we got the Christians. Then the center says, today, Umayyad, and remember what happened? Umayyad Mosque, there goes al-Shara up to the pulpit to announce the new Syrian government. Just like, by the way, it's almost identical to Baghdad, ISIS going into the mosque in Mosul to announce the ISIS caliphate. I mean, they're almost identical. And then the other one was tomorrow, Al-Aqsa, Jerusalem, and the Jews. So this is not, as I've said, this is not a poster for a rally. This is a battle plan that he's laying out right in front of you. I showed this to somebody who's part Syrian, and she's like, "Where did you find that? I can't believe that." And you see this imagery on his social media and Turkish social media accounts. Israel's picked up on this. This is talking about the Turkish Qatari alliance, Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar is described as the ATM for Turkey. They may not get along, but they have this united thing to spread the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And by the way, how are they doing? Come back second hour, and I'll play you a video of my friend Dumasani Washington talking about this. So this is, I love this graphic I found, this Qatar playing as a Trojan horse. And this is my little playing card, the Essential Caliphate House of Cards Toolkit. And you see him playing Al-Jilani as a puppet. And so he's on track to do this. So here is Ohad Tal speaking in the Knesset about the threat of Syria. This was a few weeks ago. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My fellow Knesset members, today we are facing a new strategic challenge that, in my view, should concern every security and political official more than any other threat, the Turkish threat. Turkey, under Erdogan's leadership, is not just a rival, it is rapidly and powerfully becoming a threat that, in the not-so-distant future, could be much greater even than the Iranian threat. Today, Turkey is a stronger country than Iran, economically, militarily, and diplomatically. It is a member of NATO, enjoys legitimacy in Washington, and also maintains good relations in Beijing. At the same time, beneath its Western veneer, Turkey harbors a strong Islamist fundamentalist element that is only growing stronger. The combination of all these components is a strategic powder keg that threatens the state of Israel, but not only us, it threatens the entire West. As a whole, Turkey is actively and deliberately working against Israel's interests in every possible arena. It systematically grants legitimacy and even funds Hamas's terror base, while the political leadership of this murderous terrorist organization sits comfortably in Istanbul and Ankara. Our message to the world must be sharp and clear. A country that provides shelter to our main enemies will not be given any role. Thank you. Whether it be security.
And he's right. And this is a recent development. So a year ago, Damascus falls to Turkish-backed rebels. Now Turkey's setting up radar systems and that type of thing in Syria. These were supposedly a red line. And then, but none of this makes sense to me. I'll be honest with you. We're pushing through Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to have Turkey come in to provide peacekeeping troops in Gaza. When you have all the Turkish rhetoric saying we're going to take over Israel. And they don't care if it's 100 years. They want to destroy it. The rhetoric is there. The language was there. It's based on passages in the Quran, some of which are inside the Dome of the Rock that say Jesus has no son. Right there on the Temple Mount. It's crazy. So about 2 weeks ago, Ruth Wasserman Land, who is a former member of Knesset, she used to work with Shimon Peres. She was in the Blue and White Party, which is Danny Gantz's party. And she's been diplomatic. She speaks like 4 languages. She was talking on I-24 News about 2 weeks ago. And I think this is like one of the best short clips of anything I've ever played. So here's Ruth Wasserman Land talking about Syria and what's going on there.
How now must Israel work to keep the Turks from the door?
So one issue that I'd like to comment on, I completely respect and agree with every word you said, but I would even go further and say that it's not that Israel is afraid that Turkey will take over or use Syria as a stepping stone towards Israel. I think that there is no longer a Syria. I think that it's a facade. I think that it's Turkey that we are facing. It's interesting that Asharia keeps saying that Israel is, in fact, in the southern part of Syrian soil, but it says no word about Turkey being in the northern part of Syrian soil, and not for a short while, but rather for a very long while. And this is something that is a huge issue. One, Turkey is a huge country, very geostrategically placed in terms of its geographic placing. Secondly, it's a NATO member. In terms of military might, it's very capable. And obviously supporting the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, having grown up on the, let's say, ideology of the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Erdogan is carrying out the absolute first stepping stones and the foundation of a future Ottoman Empire. He says it in his speeches, he speaks it in his actions. He is placing himself in Libya, in Sudan, in many places in Africa. He is the next Iran. And when Iran and the Shiite axis lowers or weakens, always the Sunni axis strengthens and vice versa. And this is something that it will eat from within the West if it doesn't wake up soon enough.
Very astute comment. She also has a article. It's on the Jerusalem Post website called the Jerusalem Report will be published tomorrow, I believe. As Iran weakens, Turkey emerges as a new threat to Israel in the West. She goes on to say that, Iran went away. They lost their asset in Syria when Assad, was overthrown and he fled to Russia. But she says this, the regime itself, this is talking about Syria, has begun a slow but unmistakable internal unraveling. But wounded animals are dangerous and we should be clear-eyed. Tehran has not yet spoken its final word. So Tehran's going to come back. There's a lot of threats. We'll talk about that second hour. But she talks about the fact that as the Shiite part of Islam has kind of gone into a little bit of a decline for a little bit, the Sunnis immediately rise to come in. And the Shiites will go along with them as long as they're going against Israel. That's where they will be united. Ankara's de facto occupation of parts of Syria, along with its military footprint across Africa, particularly in Libya and Sudan. I'll also say Somalia, which we'll talk more about in the second hour, also where it bolsters Muslim Brotherhood factions, has made its expansionist ambitions clearer than ever. And so the question is, what are you going to do about it? So there's a lot of talk going on in different places. In our government, it seems like I don't think people grasp how serious of an issue this really is. It's very concerning to me. How should we respond as Christians? Well, listen, she talks about the Muslim paradox. I'll talk about Bible prophecy believing Christian paradox that we have right now. So we see all of these things unfolding. And by the way, I haven't touched on AI and technocracy. There'll be another roundtable in a couple weeks to talk about that. And we see all these things happening. And the question is, do we just sit back and let it happen, or do we speak truth about it, that this is not going to work out well? And I think we're really at that point with the rise of Turkey, with the rise of AI and technology and that type of thing. In the New York Times this morning, I do read the New York Times, their opinion section, the whole paper's opinion. I don't know why they have a separate opinion section, but anyway, we'll pretend like they don't have, that they actually, they do report the news. It's just you got to wade through their opinion stuff to get to it. But the opinion section is a big thing about 2025 was not that great a year. Well, I've got news for the people at the New York Times. In about 2 weeks, max, you're going to be saying, oh, could we go back to the good old days of 2025? That's the Bible prophecy world that we live in. We need to stand up for truth, righteousness, be salt and light and all of that. Some of these things are going to be beyond our control, but it's really a time where we need to be out there sharing the truth of the biblical, historical, geopolitical and prophetic truth of the scripture that's unfolding in the world right in front of us, and stand for truth and righteousness and share the gospel with those around us. It's really, I think we are at that time. I mean, there was this on a Arab station yesterday. The guy was saying, we are coming after Israel. Even though the Israelis may have refused to accept Turkish troops as peacekeepers, they haven't seen anything yet. That's where we are. So I would say I would probably echo that with a sort of a different meaning. We haven't seen anything yet. There's a lot of things going on. So let's pray, and then we'll do prophecy updates second hour. Lord, thanks so much for the truth of the scriptures that you gave us, the blessing that you gave to inform us about the world in which we live, that it would be, as we see these things unfold, that it would be a motivation to us to live our lives in the right way and share the gospel with those around us. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.